In the rolling hills of Wyoming's cattle country, where success is measured in acres and livestock, reputation can be worth more than money itself. For some, wealth brings comfort and security. For others, it becomes a burden that isolates them from genuine human connection. This is the story of William Hartford, a man whose business acumen had built an empire, but whose personal life remained painfully empty. And Grace Collins, a 15-year-old girl whose world shattered in a single tragic night. When circumstances forced their paths to cross, neither could have predicted how profoundly they would change each other's understanding of what it truly means to be family. Sometimes, the most unlikely partnerships bloom in the most challenging circumstances. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is simply the chance to prove their worth. Before we begin this touching story of unexpected bonds and second chances, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our global audience. William Hartford stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his ranch office, surveying the vast expanse of prime Wyoming grassland that stretched to the horizon. At 55, he commanded one of the largest cattle operations in the state, with holdings that spanned over 30,000 acres. The Hartford Ranch was more than a business. It was an institution, a testament to 3 generations of shrewd dealing and relentless ambition. But success, William had learned, came with its own peculiar loneliness. His assistant, Margaret Chen, knocked on the office door before entering with his morning coffee. Margaret had worked for the Hartford family for over 20 years and was one of the few people who could read his moods and knew when to speak and when to simply leave him to his thoughts. "The town council meeting is at 10, she said, setting the coffee on his mahogany desk. "Then lunch with the Senator's Agriculture Committee." William nodded absently, his attention still focused on the view outside. In a small community like Cedar Falls, Wyoming, everything was noticed, discussed, analyzed. William's every move was scrutinized, not just because of his wealth, but because of his history. The truth was that William Hartford had been performing his entire adult life, playing the role of the successful businessman, the pillar of the community. His marriage to Elizabeth had ended in a bitter divorce 10 years earlier, a very public spectacle that had provided the town gossips with months of entertainment. Since then, he'd thrown himself even deeper into work, building the ranch into an agricultural empire that was respected throughout the region. But respect and affection were 2 very different things. The phone rang, interrupting his brooding. Margaret answered in the outer office, and a moment later she appeared in his doorway with an expression that suggested the call was both urgent and unwelcome. "It's Sheriff Morrison," she said. "He says it's important." William picked up the phone, wondering what crisis required law enforcement attention at 9 in the morning. "Sheriff, what can I do for you?" "William, I'm sorry to bother you, but we've got a situation here. You remember Tom and Linda Collins? They worked for you about 5 years ago. Tom was one of your ranch foremen." William did remember them. Tom Collins had been a good worker, reliable and honest, but he'd left the Hartford Ranch to start his own small operation. It had been an amicable parting. "Of course. What about them?" "They were killed in a car accident last night. Drunk driver hit them head-on coming back from their anniversary dinner." William felt the familiar weight that came with tragic news in a small community. "That's terrible. Were there any other family members involved?" "That's why I'm calling. They have a daughter, Grace. She's 15, a sophomore at the high school. With Tom and Linda gone, she's got nowhere to go. No relatives that we can locate. No family friends willing or able to take her in long-term." William was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. "The state will take custody today unless we can find alternative arrangements," Sheriff Morrison continued. "Grace doesn't want to go into the foster system. She specifically asked me to call you." "She asked for me? Why?" "Apparently her father talked about you a lot, how you'd been fair to him, how you'd helped him get his start. Grace has this idea that you might be willing to help her too." William stared out at his empty, perfectly manicured ranch, processing this unexpected request. He barely knew Grace Collins, had seen her around town a few times, a quiet girl with dark hair and serious eyes. "Sheriff, I don't know anything about raising a teenage girl. I know it's a lot to ask, William. But you've got the resources, the space, and frankly, you're about the only person in this county with the reputation and stability that would make the courts comfortable with an arrangement like this." William made a decision that surprised him with its swiftness. "Bring her to the ranch." "William, are you sure?" "Bring her to the ranch," William repeated. "We'll figure out the details as we go." After hanging up, William sat in his office chair, wondering what he'd just committed himself to. In the space of a 5-minute conversation, his life had taken a turn that he couldn't have anticipated. Margaret appeared in the doorway, clearly having overheard at least part of the conversation. "Sir, is everything all right?" "Margaret, cancel everything for today except the absolutely essential. And could you prepare the guest room upstairs? Make sure it's suitable for a teenage girl." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course, sir. Should I pick up anything specific?" William realized he had no idea what a 15-year-old girl might need. "Yes, everything. Whatever you think she might need." Udi, as Margaret left to make preparations, William returned to the window, but now the vast emptiness of his ranch looked different. Instead of isolation, it represented possibility. He thought about Grace Collins, a girl he barely knew who was about to trust him with her future. The weight of that responsibility was both daunting and oddly exhilarating. For the first time in years, William Hartford was about to do something that wasn't calculated for maximum efficiency. He was about to do something simply because it was right. Learning to trust. Grace Collins sat in Sheriff Morrison's patrol car, watching the familiar landscape of Cedar Falls roll past through tear-swollen eyes. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but everything was different now. The world she'd known had vanished in the space of a phone call at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. The Hartford Ranch entrance appeared ahead, marked by an imposing stone archway that Grace had driven past hundreds of times, but never through. Her father had worked here for 3 years, and she'd heard stories about the grandeur of the main house. "You sure about this, Grace?" Sheriff Morrison asked, as they turned up the long gravel driveway. Grace nodded firmly. Her father had talked about William Hartford with a respect that bordered on reverence, not because of his wealth, but because of his fairness. "He's a hard man," Tom Collins had told his daughter, "but he's an honest one." The main house came into view, and Grace felt her breath catch. It was larger than she'd imagined, a sprawling structure of native stone and timber that seemed to grow out of the landscape itself. Sheriff Morrison parked near the front steps, and almost immediately the massive oak door opened. William Hartford stepped out, and Grace's first impression was of a man who looked exactly like what she'd expected. Tall, well-dressed, with graying hair and confident bearing. But there was something in his expression that surprised her. Uncertainty, maybe even nervousness. "Grace," he said as she climbed out of the patrol car, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man, and your mother was always kind to everyone she met." Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. The kindness in his tone was unexpected. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she managed. "I know it's not normal." "Nothing about this situation is normal," William replied gently, "but we'll figure it out together." After the sheriff left, Grace found herself alone with William Hartford, a man who was essentially a stranger despite his local reputation. The silence stretched between them, filled with mutual uncertainty. "Would you like to see your room?" William asked finally. Grace nodded, and he led her through the front door into a foyer that was larger than her parents' entire living room. The interior was elegant but not ostentatious. Polished wood floors, comfortable leather furniture, artwork that looked expensive but not showy. The guest room was beautiful, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a desk by the window overlooking the pastures, and a bookshelf filled with classic novels. On the dresser, Grace noticed toiletries, some clothes that looked approximately her size, and a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Margaret, she's my assistant and housekeeper, prepared this," William said. If there's anything you need, just let us know." Grace set down her few belongings and looked around the room that was now apparently hers. It was larger and more comfortable than her bedroom at home had been, but it felt foreign. "Mr. Hartford," she said quietly, "I need you to know that I'm not expecting charity. I know this is temporary, just until I turn 18. I won't be a burden." William studied her face, noting the fierce independence that reminded him of himself at that age. "Grace, first of all, call me William. Second, this isn't charity. I offered because I wanted to help, and because I think maybe we can help each other." "Help each other how?" William was quiet for a moment. "I've been alone in this house for a long time, maybe too long. Having someone else here might be good for both of us." Grace wasn't sure she believed him, but there was something in his expression that suggested he was being honest about his own loneliness. "What would you expect from me?" she asked. "For now, just focus on school, on grieving your parents, on adjusting to being here. Everything else can wait." That afternoon, Margaret arrived to help Grace settle in. Margaret was a small, efficient woman in her 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she could handle any crisis with competence and grace. "Grace, dear," she said, "I picked up some clothes, but we'll need to go shopping properly once you've had time to adjust. Do you have any dietary restrictions?" Grace shook her head, overwhelmed by the kindness being shown to her. "What about school supplies, activities?" "I don't really do activities," Grace said quietly. "I worked after school to help my parents with expenses." Margaret and William exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand that Grace's childhood had involved more responsibility and less leisure than either had realized. "What kind of work?" William asked. "Cleaning houses with my mom on weekends, babysitting, some bookkeeping for small businesses. I'm good with numbers." William filed that information away, impressed despite himself. At 15, Grace had more practical work experience than many adults. That evening, they shared their first dinner together in the ranch house's formal dining room. It was an awkward affair, with too much space between them and too little conversation. "Grace," William said finally, "tomorrow we'll eat in the kitchen. This feels too formal for everyday meals." She looked up, surprised. "You don't have to change things for me." "I'm not changing things for you. I'm changing them for us." After dinner, Grace retreated to her room, while William sat in his study trying to process the day's events. Having another person in the house felt strange after years of solitude, but it wasn't entirely unpleasant. Around 10 o'clock, he heard soft footsteps and then a gentle knock on his study door. "Come in." Grace appeared in the doorway wearing pajamas that Margaret had bought. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, "and to ask you something. Of course, my parents had life insurance, but it's not much. I want to contribute to my expenses here. I know everything costs money." William felt something tighten in his chest. Here was a 15-year-old girl who had lost everything, and her primary concern was not being a financial burden. "Grace, that's not necessary." "It is to me," she interrupted firmly. "I need to feel like I'm earning my place here." William recognized the pride in her voice, the same fierce independence that had driven him throughout his own life. "All right," he said. "We'll figure out ways for you to contribute, but not because you have to, because you want to." Grace smiled for the first time since arriving at the ranch, and William realized that helping her find her footing here was going to be more rewarding than any business deal he'd ever closed. As she headed back upstairs, William found himself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. For the first time since his divorce, he had someone to care about besides himself. Building something new. 3 months after Grace's arrival at the Hartford Ranch, the rhythms of their shared life had begun to settle into something that resembled normalcy. The awkwardness of those first weeks had gradually given way to a comfortable routine that surprised both of them. Grace had thrown herself into her studies with a determination that impressed her teachers. She maintained perfect attendance, completed every assignment meticulously, and participated in class discussions with thoughtful insight. But William noticed that she seemed to have no close friends, no social activities beyond school requirements. "She's brilliant," her English teacher had told William during a parent-teacher conference, but she keeps herself separate from the other students. William understood that distance. It was the same protective barrier he'd built around himself years ago. On this particular Saturday morning in January, William found Grace in the ranch office, hunched over a computer, with spreadsheets open across multiple screens. She'd been helping him organize financial records, a task that had revealed her exceptional aptitude for numbers. "You've been at this for 3 hours," he said, setting a cup of hot chocolate beside her. "Maybe it's time for a break?" Grace looked up, her dark hair falling across her face. "I'm almost finished reconciling the equipment purchases for last quarter. Your previous bookkeeper had some interesting organizational methods." William grimaced. His former accountant had retired the previous year, and he'd been struggling to keep the financial records in order ever since. Grace's offer to help had been both unexpected and incredibly valuable. "What would you call it?" "Creatively chaotic," Grace said with a small smile. "But it's fixable." Over the past months, William had watched Grace bloom in small increments. Good nutrition, adequate sleep, and freedom from financial worry had restored the healthy glow to her complexion. But more importantly, having intellectual challenges and meaningful work had brought back the spark in her eyes. "Grace, can I ask you something?" She nodded, saving her work and turning to face him. "Are you happy here?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Of course, why would you ask that?" "Because I've been thinking about making this arrangement more permanent. Formal adoption, I mean." "But only if it's what you want." Grace went very still. "You want to adopt me?" "I want to give you security, a legal guarantee that you'll have a home here as long as you want one. But more than that, I want you to know that you belong here. Not as a charity case or a temporary arrangement, but as my daughter." Grace's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "Why?" "Because you've brought something back to this house that I didn't realize was missing. Purpose, warmth, the sense that what I'm building here matters beyond just accumulating wealth. But you barely know me. I know enough. I know you're intelligent, principled, hardworking, and kind. Grace, I may not have been your father for the first 15 years of your life, but I'd like the chance to be your father for everything that comes next." Grace was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but thick with emotion. "What about what people will say? You could marry someone, have your own biological children. Instead, you want to adopt a poor orphan girl?" William felt a surge of anger at the underlying assumptions in her question, not anger at Grace, but at the social expectations that had made her feel she was somehow less worthy. "Grace, listen to me very carefully. You are not a poor orphan girl I'm rescuing out of pity. You are a remarkable young woman who has enriched my life immeasurably. Any man would be lucky to call you his daughter." The tears Grace had been holding back finally spilled over. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that too." William opened his arms, and for the first time since her arrival, Grace hugged him without reservation. The adoption process moved quickly once they'd made the decision. Grace's legal status as an orphan with no living relatives simplified the paperwork considerably, and William's reputation in the community meant that the necessary background checks were largely formalities. But the emotional process of becoming a family was more complex. "You know," Grace said one evening as they worked together in the office, "I used to think that having money would solve every problem, but watching you these past months, I realize it just creates different kinds of problems, such as people always wondering about your motives, whether relationships are real or just based on what you can provide." It was an insightful observation from someone who was learning firsthand how wealth could complicate human connections. "That's why this," William gestured between them, "is so important to me. What we've built is based on who we are as people." Grace's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. The news of William's adoption plans had spread through Cedar Falls with small-town speed, and reactions were mixed. Some people praised William for his generosity. Others whispered about ulterior motives. The criticism stung Grace more than it did William, who had long ago developed thick skin where public opinion was concerned. Henderson asked me if I was comfortable living alone with you, Grace told him one afternoon, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and anger. William felt his own anger rise, but he kept his voice calm. People talk, Grace. We can't control what they say, but we can control how we respond to it. How do you stand it? Practice, William said dryly. And the knowledge that the people whose opinions actually matter know the truth about who I am. The legal finalization of the adoption took place on a snowy February morning in the county courthouse. Judge Williams made the proceedings as warm and personal as legal formalities allowed. Grace Hartford, the judge said as he signed the final documents, congratulations on your new family. Hearing her new name spoken aloud made the reality hit Grace with unexpected force. She was no longer Grace Collins, the orphaned daughter of a ranch foreman. She was Grace Hartford, member of one of Wyoming's most prominent families. But more importantly, she was no longer alone. That evening they celebrated quietly at the ranch with Margaret and a few longtime employees. It wasn't a large gathering, but it felt right, intimate and genuine rather than showy. So what's next? Margaret asked as they shared cake in the kitchen. William looked at Grace, who was talking animatedly with the ranch foreman about her ideas for improving operations. She had opinions about everything these days, informed opinions backed by research and careful thought. College applications, William said. Grace wants to study agricultural business. She's thinking about Colorado State. And after that, William smiled, watching his daughter explain something complex with passion that reminded him of himself at that age. After that, she'll probably end up running this place better than I ever did. It was a prediction that filled him with pride rather than concern. For the first time in years, William Hartford wasn't worried about what would happen to his life's work when he was gone. He had someone to pass it to who would honor what he'd built while making it her own. The legacy of love. 2 years later, William stood on the front porch watching Grace direct the setup for her high school graduation party. At 17, she had grown into a confident young woman who moved through the world with natural authority that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of achieving. "Dad, where do you want the speakers?" Grace called from the lawn where she was orchestrating the setup with military efficiency. Dad. Even after 2 years, the word still had the power to catch William off guard with its simple perfection. Grace had graduated as valedictorian of her class, with early acceptance to Colorado State University's agricultural business program and a full scholarship that she'd earned through a combination of academic excellence and a comprehensive business plan she'd developed for modernizing ranch operations in the digital age. The local newspaper had run a feature story about her achievements, focusing on her transformation from orphan tragedy to inspiring success story, but also highlighting her innovative ideas for sustainable agriculture that had caught the attention of university professors and industry leaders alike. What the newspaper hadn't captured was the quieter transformation that had taken place within the walls of the Hartford house. The way two people who had been living in isolation had learned to become a family. "William, you look like a proud father," Margaret observed, joining him on the porch. "I am a proud father. Hard to believe it's been 2 years since she arrived here." William nodded, still amazed by how naturally Grace had fit into his life. She had a gift for understanding ranch management, but more than that, she had brought warmth and energy to a house that had been echoing with loneliness. "She's changed everything," he said quietly. "She's changed you," Margaret corrected. "You're a different person than you were before she came. Happier, more connected, more willing to let people get close." It was true. Grace's presence had forced William to engage with the world beyond his business interests. Parent-teacher conferences, school events, graduation parties, all the social connections that came with raising a child had gradually drawn him back into community life. As the afternoon progressed and guests arrived for the celebration, William found himself observing the easy way Grace moved between different social groups. She was equally comfortable talking agriculture with long-time ranchers who had known her father, discussing college plans and future career aspirations with classmates who respected her academic achievements, and charming the elderly ladies from town who remembered her parents and had watched her transformation with approving eyes and genuine affection. "She's got your confidence," Sheriff Morrison observed, joining William by the barbecue grill, "but she's got a warmth that draws people in." "She's her own person," William said, "stronger than either of her biological parents or me. She's taken the best parts of all her influences and created something unique." That evening, after the last guests had departed and the cleanup was complete, William and Grace sat on the front porch, watching the sun set over their land. It had become their traditional way of ending important days, sharing the quiet beauty of the Wyoming landscape. "Thank you for today," Grace said, curled up in the porch swing that William had installed shortly after her arrival. "It was perfect. You did all the work. I just provided the venue. You provided a lot more than that." Grace was quiet for a moment, then continued in a more serious tone. "Dad, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "When I graduate from college, I want to come back here. I want to work alongside you, learn everything about running this operation, and eventually take over when you're ready to retire." William felt a surge of emotion that he carefully kept from showing. He'd hoped for this, but had never wanted to pressure her into a decision that might feel like obligation rather than choice. "Are you sure? You'll have a lot of opportunities after graduation." "I could work anywhere," Grace agreed. "But this is home, this land, this operation, this community. It's where I belong. And I have ideas about how we can expand, modernize, maybe even start programs to help other young people learn sustainable agriculture." William smiled, recognizing his own entrepreneurial spirit reflected in his daughter's ambitious plans. "Tell me more about these ideas." For the next hour, Grace outlined her comprehensive vision for the future of the Hartford Ranch. She talked enthusiastically about incorporating cutting-edge technology for cattle management, developing innovative educational programs that would attract students from across the region, creating strategic partnerships with universities and conservation organizations, and even establishing internship programs for young people interested in sustainable agriculture careers. Her plans were not only thoughtful and well-researched, but also ambitious without being unrealistic, showing a perfect balance of vision and practical understanding. "You've really thought this through," William said when she finished. "I've had good teachers. You've shown me that success isn't just about making money. It's about building something that lasts, something that makes a positive difference. Grace, I need you to understand something. If you decide to take over this ranch someday, it won't be because you're my daughter. It'll be because you're the most qualified person for the job. I know that, and I plan to earn it." William had no doubt she would achieve everything she set her mind to. Grace had inherited her biological father's unwavering work ethic and her mother's natural compassion for others, but she'd also developed her own unique vision for what transformational leadership could look like in the modern agricultural industry. She understood that success meant more than profit margins. It meant building sustainable systems that would benefit the land, the animals, the workers, and the broader community for generations to come. "There's something else," Grace said, her tone becoming more personal. "I want you to know that everything good in my life started the day you decided to take a chance on a scared 15-year-old girl. You didn't just give me a home, you gave me a future, an identity, a sense of purpose." William felt tears threatening and didn't bother to hide them. "Grace, you saved me as much as I saved you. This house was just a building before you arrived. You made it a home." "We made it a home," she corrected, "together." As the stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky, father and daughter sat in comfortable silence, each contemplating how dramatically their lives had changed since that desperate phone call 2 years earlier. William thought about the man he'd been before Grace's arrival, successful but isolated, wealthy but emotionally bankrupt. Grace hadn't just filled the empty rooms of his house, she'd filled the empty spaces in his heart. Grace thought about the girl she'd been, grieving, alone, terrified of an uncertain future. She'd found not just shelter in William's home, but transformation. He'd given her security, education, and opportunity, but more than that, he'd given her unconditional love and the confidence to dream bigger than she'd ever thought possible. "Dad," Grace said softly as they prepared to go inside, "do you think my parents would be proud of who I've become?" William turned to look at his daughter, brilliant, compassionate, strong, and ready to take on the world, and felt certain of his answer. "Grace, they would be extraordinarily proud, but more than that, they would be grateful that you found your way to where you belong." As they walked into the house together, William realized that the Hartford Ranch would continue for another generation, but it would be something entirely new under Grace's leadership. She would honor the legacy he'd built while creating her own. Some families are born, others are chosen, and sometimes the most powerful bonds are forged not in moments of joy, but in moments of crisis, when two people choose to trust each other with their futures. The wealthy rancher had indeed taken in the town orphan, but in the end, they had both found something far more valuable than money or security. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had discovered what it truly meant to be family. This heartwarming story of Grace and William shows us that family comes in many forms, and sometimes the most profound connections happen when we open our hearts to unexpected possibilities. Their journey reminds us that love, trust, and mutual respect can transform any relationship into something beautiful and lasting. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more inspiring stories about the power of human connection. Let us know in the comments what city you're watching from and share your own stories about family bonds that transcended traditional definitions. Remember, we all have the capacity to change someone's life through simple acts of kindness and the willingness to invest in another person's future. Until next time, keep believing in the transformative power of love and second chances.